Amara, what are you still doing in bed? It's the first day of term. Mom, please. Amara sat up, her voice trembling. Can't I change schools after what happened to Zainab? Mrs. Okafor sat on the bed, beside her daughter, smoothing out the wrinkles on the bedsheet absent-mindedly. The mention of Zainab made her pause. The tragedy of last term still felt fresh, like an unhealed wound. Amara, sweetheart, we've talked about this, she said gently, tucking a stray curl behind her daughter's ear. The school explained everything. Zainab's death was a terrible accident. But Mom, what about the others? Amara's voice grew stronger. David died the term before last after getting sick suddenly. Emmanuel disappeared the time before that, and they found his body in the school garden. 3 students, Mom. 3 times. Mrs. Okafor's face showed a flicker of concern before she masked it with a reassuring smile. You've been watching too many horror movies during the holiday. Starlight Academy is the best school in B. Do you know how many parents would give anything to have their children study there? I don't care about that, Amara muttered, gripping the edge of her blanket tightly. Zainab was my best friend. We promised to graduate together, and now tears welled up in her eyes, threatening to spill over. Mrs. Okafor pulled her daughter into a tight hug, her fingers stroking Amara's back soothingly. Since losing her husband 5 years ago, moments like this reminded her how precious Amara was, her only child, her everything. If I have to go, Amara said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, we need to pray first. Mrs. Okafor nodded, taking her daughter's hands in hers. Dear Heavenly Father, she began, her voice strong and clear, as Amara returns to school today, we ask for your divine protection. Guard her from all evil and danger. Let your angels surround her. In the bustling African city of B stood a primary school known as Starlight Academy, or SLA for short. The school's reputation preceded itself. Every parent in the region dreamed of having their child attend the academy, known for producing the brightest students in the city. Its tall gates, painted a deep shade of blue, stood as a barrier between the school and the outside world, as if guarding secrets only known to those within. The school's owner, Madame Beatrice, commanded respect wherever she went, bold and elegant, with sharp features that seemed to soften only when addressing her beloved students. She had built Starlight Academy from nothing into the most sought after primary school in B. But beneath the polished exterior and academic excellence, dark secrets lurked in the school's shadows. No one knew this better than 7-year-old Amara Okafor. Amara stood at the school gates, watching other students stream past her. Many wore bright smiles, excited to reunite with friends after the holiday, their laughter filling the air. But Amara felt different, alone. Last term, Zainab and I stood right here, she thought to herself, remembering how they had planned their final year together. We were going to join the drama club, and she was going to teach me how to... Amara, you're next to die, a strange voice whispered behind her. The voice sent a chill down Amara's spine. She spun around, heart pounding, but saw no one. The trees nearby swayed slightly in the morning breeze, their rustling leaves the only sound in the stillness. God forbid! She exclaimed as she hurried toward the assembly ground, her pulse racing. Madame Beatrice stood on the raised platform, commanding attention as always. Looking elegant in her perfectly pressed blue suit, she smiled warmly at the gathered students. Welcome back, my bright stars. Madame Beatrice's voice carried across the schoolyard, smooth and confident. I know last term ended on a sad note with the tragic loss of our dear Zainab. However, we must continue our pursuit of excellence. Starlight Academy has a reputation to maintain. In class, Amara couldn't focus on the lessons. Her mind kept wandering to the empty desk beside her, where Zainab used to sit. The whispered threat from this morning echoed in her thoughts like a warning she couldn't shake off. Hey! Amara looked up to see a girl she didn't recognize. The new student had friendly eyes and wore her hair in neat braids. I'm Fatima, the girl said, shifting her books. Just transferred from Kano. Mind if I borrow a pencil? Still getting organized. Amara handed her a pencil, studying her new seatmate. There was something genuine about Fatima's smile that made Amara feel at ease. Pleased to meet you, Amara, she replied. Welcome to Starlight Academy. Everyone keeps telling me how lucky I am to get into this school, Fatima chatted as she arranged her books. Though my aunt seemed worried when I got accepted, said something strange about being careful. Amara's heart skipped a beat. What did she mean by that? Before Fatima could answer, their class teacher, Mrs. Abdul, called for attention. The lesson began, but Amara couldn't stop thinking about Fatima's words. Over the next few weeks, Amara and Fatima became close friends. During lunch breaks, they sat under the big mango tree in the schoolyard, sharing their food and stories. The tree's wide branches cast a comforting shade over them, shielding them from the midday sun. So, why did you transfer to Starlight Academy? Amara asked one day, biting into a piece of fried plantain. My parents got a job transfer to B. My aunt didn't want me to come to this school though. Why not? She heard some stories. Fatima lowered her voice, glancing around, about students dying. Amara's grip on her spoon tightened. But my parents said those were just rumors. Fatima hesitated, then whispered, That's what my parents said too. Amara looked up. They're not rumors. My friend Zainab died last term. They said she fell down the stairs, but she stopped as she noticed Madame Beatrice walking toward them, her sharp heels clicking against the tiled floor. Good afternoon, my bright stars. Madame Beatrice smiled, but her eyes seemed cold, almost calculating. How are you adjusting without Zainab? How are you adjusting without Zainab? Fine, Ma, Amara mumbled, shifting uncomfortably. Good, good. And Fatima? Settling in well? Yes, Ma. Fatima replied, her voice quieter than before. As Madame Beatrice walked away, both girls shivered despite the hot afternoon sun. The scent of lavender perfume lingered in the air, but beneath it was something else, something metallic, almost like rusted iron. Did you feel that? Fatima whispered, rubbing her arms. Amara nodded. Strange things happen here all the time. Yesterday, I heard crying from the empty classroom on the third floor. When I looked inside, nobody was there. The chairs were all facing the blackboard like they hadn't been touched in years. Maybe we should tell someone. Who would believe us? Everyone thinks Starlight Academy is perfect. As midterm approached, excitement filled the school. Everyone talked about Madame Beatrice's special cake, a long-standing tradition. I can't wait, said Mary, a girl who sat behind Amara. My sister said it's the best cake she's ever tasted. What makes it so special? Fatima asked, twirling a pen between her fingers. Nobody knows the recipe. Madame Beatrice makes it herself in the school kitchen, late at night. My sister said she never lets anyone watch. On celebration day, all students gathered in the main hall. The chandeliers overhead cast golden light onto the polished floors, making the entire space gleam. Madame Beatrice stood at the front, beside a large table filled with cake slices, her smile wide, but her hands gripping the table's edge tightly. "My dear children," she announced, "it's time for our special treat. Remember, each slice is unique, just like each of you." As she moved through the rows, distributing cake, Amara noticed something odd. Madame Beatrice's hands trembled slightly, and she kept glancing at a large clock on the wall. The second hand ticked forward in slow, exaggerated movements, as if the room itself was holding its breath. When Madame Beatrice reached Amara's row, she paused longer than necessary. "Here, Amara dear, a special slice for you." Her smile seemed forced, and for a split second her gaze flickered toward Fatima. Amara took the cake, but before she could eat it, Fatima tapped her arm. "Amara, come with me to the bathroom, please. Can't it wait? Please. It's urgent." Fatima insisted, her expression tense. Amara tucked the cake into her bag and followed her friend, unaware that this simple action would save her life. That night, in a dark shrine, hidden on the outskirts of B, two figures met. The air was thick with incense, the flickering candlelight casting eerie shadows on the walls lined with ancient symbols. "You have failed me," a harsh voice echoed. Mother Superior, a fearsome figure in flowing black robes, glared at Madame Beatrice from beneath her hood. The heart was not consumed. Without it, there can be no sacrifice. Madame Beatrice fell to her knees, her breath shaky. "Please, Mother Superior, I don't understand what went wrong. I gave Amara the slice myself. Silence, find me my sacrifice, or everything you've built will crumble. Remember, Io." "Yes, mistress," Beatrice whispered, her fingers curling into fists. The next morning, Mrs. Okafor was tidying Amara's room when she noticed a strange smell coming from the school bag. It was faint but unmistakable, like something rotting. "Amara," she called, "come here for a minute." Amara ran up the stairs. "Yes, Mom." Mrs. Okafor held up the school bag. "What's in here? It smells weird." "Oh, that must be Madame Beatrice's cake from yesterday. I forgot to eat it." Mrs. Okafor unzipped the bag and screamed. Instead of cake, she pulled out what looked like raw meat, dripping with fresh blood. Amara's eyes widened. "Mom, that was cake yesterday. I swear." Mrs. Okafor's hands trembled as she held the bloodied mass. "This is not cake, Amara. This looks like a heart. But how?" Amara whispered, her stomach churning. "Step back." Everyone Madame Beatrice had once said, "Cake is the best. We all eat it at every celebration." Mrs. Okafor grabbed her phone, her voice urgent. "I'm calling Pastor Jeremiah. Something is very wrong here." 20 minutes later, Pastor Jeremiah arrived at their house. He was a tall man with kind eyes, but today his face was serious as Mrs. Okafor explained everything. "Show me the meat," he said. When Mrs. Okafor brought it, Pastor Emmanuel's face darkened. "This is no ordinary meat. There's evil here, powerful evil. We must go to the school immediately." "Now?" Amara asked. "But it's Saturday." "Now," Pastor Emmanuel said firmly. before it's too late. At the school, they found Madame Beatrice in her office. She looked surprised to see them, her usual poise faltering for the first time. "What brings you here on a Saturday?" she asked, her fingers tightening around a gold pen on her desk. "Madame Beatrice," Pastor Emmanuel's voice was firm. "Do you want to explain this?" "I don't know what you mean," she said, but her voice trembled slightly. Pastor Emmanuel began to pray loudly, his voice filling the room like a rolling storm. "Stop!" Madame Beatrice shouted. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Pastor Emmanuel continued. "The Lord has shown me everything. How many children, Madame Beatrice, how many lives have you sacrificed?" Before she could answer, a new voice filled the room. "So you've discovered our little secret." Mother Superior appeared, her black robe swelling with dark energy. "Nothing is impossible with God," Pastor Emmanuel declared. The light burst forward, engulfing Mother Superior. When the light faded, Mother Superior was gone. Only a scorched mark on the floor showed where she had stood. Madame Beatrice lay on the ground, sobbing. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Your actions cost the lives of innocent children," Pastor Emmanuel said. "You must face the consequences." Madame Beatrice looked at the crowd gathering outside her office. Parents who lived nearby had started arriving, drawn by the commotion. Her perfectly maintained image was crumbling. "I should tell them everything," she said quietly. "They deserve to know the truth." "Yes, they do," Pastor Emmanuel agreed. Fatima pushed through the crowd, running to Amara. "I was so worried. I saw all these lights from my house nearby and you saved my life." Amara hugged her friend. Madame Beatrice stood up slowly, facing the growing crowd. Her voice shook as she spoke. 10 years ago, I opened this school with big dreams. But nobody wanted to enroll their children here. 2 years passed, and I had only 2 students. I was desperate. She paused, wiping tears from her eyes. That's when I met Mother Superior. She promised to make my school famous. She said she would give the students special abilities, make them brilliant. All I had to do was sacrifice innocent children, Mrs. Okafor finished. Yes, Madame Beatrice's voice broke. During every celebration, one slice of cake contained a heart, disguised as cake, contained a heart, disguised as cake. Whoever ate it would become the sacrifice. Their life force would feed the dark powers that made other students brilliant. Gasps and cries of horror filled the crowd. "Zainab didn't fall down the stairs, did she?" Amara asked. "No," Madame Beatrice admitted. "She ate the cake last time. David before her. And Fatima before that. So many children, so many innocent lives." Pastor Emmanuel raised his hands for silence. "The evil has been defeated, but justice must still be served." Madame Beatrice nodded. "I'll turn myself in to the police." But first she walked to her desk and pulled out a thick folder. "This contains the names of every child, their real causes of death. The parents deserve to know the truth." The next few weeks were chaotic. Police investigated the school. News reporters camped outside the gates. Parents demanded answers. Amara and Fatima sat in Amara's living room, watching the news on TV. "Former school mistress confesses to multiple deaths." The headline read, "I still can't believe it." Fatima said, "All those children." "At least no one else will die," Amara replied. But what happens to the school now? That question was answered the following week. The local church council, led by Pastor Emmanuel, took over Starlight Academy. They renamed it Light of Hope Academy. As for Madame Beatrice, she confessed everything to the police. But the night before her trial was to begin, she disappeared from her cell. Some say she couldn't live with her guilt. Others believe Mother Superior's dark powers claimed her. In the end, she was never seen again. The story of Amara and Starlight Academy teaches us a powerful lesson sometimes. The most prestigious places can hide the darkest secrets. Blind trust in authority and institutions can lead to devastating consequences, especially when fear and silence prevent people from speaking out. Amara's intuition and courage saved her life, reminding us that when something feels wrong, we should never ignore our instincts. We must always question, investigate, and seek the truth, no matter how convincing the lies may seem. Evil thrives in secrecy, but it can be defeated when people unite, stand strong, and refuse to be silent. That night, Amara could not sleep. She kept thinking about Emmanuel and what she had seen. The city was unusually quiet, with only the distant hum of cars passing by. A faint breeze rustled the curtains, but Amara barely noticed. Her thoughts were consumed by the memory of Emmanuel, standing there, soaked from the rain. In the town of Zaria, there lived a hard-working man named Emmanuel. He was handsome and kind, but life had not been easy for him. After finishing secondary school in the village, Emmanuel could not afford to go to university. Years later, he came to the city and started a small laundry business, offering his services to homes and offices around town. He would wake up early, collect dirty clothes from his customers, and spend hours washing, drying, and ironing them. The rhythmic sound of scrubbing and the scent of freshly cleaned fabric became a constant in his life. The work was hard, but Emmanuel took pride in doing a good job. He was known for being reliable and always delivering clean clothes on time. Despite the difficulties, Emmanuel had one thing that kept him going, his girlfriend. Zainab. They had been together since his secondary school days in the village, and her love and support meant everything to him. Every evening, after a long day of work, Emmanuel would call. Hearing her sweet voice was the best part of his day. They would talk about their dreams for the future, imagining a life where they could be together and build a happy home. One day, Emmanuel had an idea. He asked Zainab to move to the city with him. He believed they could find better opportunities there and start building their life together. Zainab agreed, excited about the prospect of starting a new chapter with Emmanuel. When Zainab arrived in the city, Emmanuel was overjoyed. Finally, they were together. Although they didn't have much, it felt like heaven to Emmanuel. Their tiny one-room apartment was modest, but filled with warmth. Waking up to Zainab's beautiful face every morning and falling asleep next to her every night made him feel like the luckiest man in the world. Emmanuel and Zainab had agreed to wait until marriage before becoming intimate. This decision was important to Zainab, and they were happy just being close to each other. Their love was strong, and they believed it could withstand any challenge. Life seemed perfect for Emmanuel and Zainab, but their happiness was about to be tested. One day, Emmanuel was sitting in front of his laundry shop, sipping on a cup of warm tea, when he suddenly realized it was almost 400 p.m. He had promised to deliver clean clothes to one of his most important customers, Madame Beatrice, by 400 p.m. sharp. Emmanuel prided himself on always being on time, and he was not about to let a customer down now. Looking at the sky, Emmanuel saw dark clouds gathering. It was going to rain soon. He quickly grabbed a bag of clean clothes and started running towards Madame Beatrice's house, which was about a 15-minute walk away. Halfway there, the rain started pouring heavily. Emmanuel was completely soaked, but he did not stop. He held the bag of clean clothes tightly, making sure they stayed dry. When he finally reached Madame Beatrice's house, it was just 2 minutes past 400 p.m. Breathless, Emmanuel rang the doorbell. The rainwater dripped from his clothes, forming small puddles on the doorstep. When Madame Beatrice opened the door, he tried to explain why he was late. "Madam, I am sorry, I am a little late. The rain made it hard for me to get here on time," he said, trying to catch his breath. But Madame Beatrice was not listening to his words. Her eyes were fixed on Emmanuel's body, clearly visible through his wet clothes. His toned muscles, highlighted by the damp fabric clinging to his skin, made it impossible for her to look away. "Madam, can you hear me?" he asked, confused by her behavior. Beatrice snapped out of her daze. "Oh, sorry, you were saying," she asked, trying to regain her composure. Emmanuel explained again about the rain and apologized for being late. Madame Beatrice invited him inside, but Emmanuel politely refused, saying he needed to get back to his shop. As he turned to leave, Beatrice's eyes followed him, her mind filled with thoughts she knew she should not be having. That night, Beatrice could not sleep. She kept thinking about Emmanuel and what she had seen. The sound of raindrops tapping against her bedroom window only reminded her of that moment. Beatrice was married to one of the richest men in the country, but her husband was rarely at home. He was always traveling for business. Beatrice often felt lonely and neglected. The grand mansion she lived in felt empty, despite all its luxury. The next morning, Beatrice visited her best friend, Fatima. Like Beatrice, Fatima was also married to a wealthy businessman, but Fatima's husband lived abroad and had not been home in over 2 years. Fatima managed all his businesses in the country. As they were talking over a cup of coffee, Fatima noticed something was off about Beatrice. "What is wrong?" she asked her friend. After hesitating for a moment, Beatrice confessed. "Fatima, I saw something yesterday and I cannot stop thinking about it. It's Emmanuel, the laundry guy. He came to deliver clothes in the rain, and his clothes. I saw what was underneath, you know, and now I can't get it out of my mind." Fatima was shocked. "Beatrice, remember you are married," she scolded. "You can't be having these thoughts about other men." "But my husband is never around," Beatrice argued. "Don't you ever feel lonely too?" Fatima sighed, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "Of course I do. I have not seen my husband in 2 years. But that does not mean we can just do whatever we want. We made vows, Beatrice. You need to forget about this Emmanuel guy." Beatrice nodded, but as she drove home, she knew she could not let it go. That evening, she decided to visit Emmanuel's shop. When Emmanuel saw Beatrice's expensive car pull up, he rushed to greet her, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Good evening, madam. You didn't have to come all the way here. I could have picked up the clothes from your house," he said politely. Beatrice smiled, adjusting her diamond bracelet. "Actually, Emmanuel, I have a special job for you. It is a home service. Come with me. I will drive you there." Emmanuel, always eager to please his customers, quickly locked his shop and got into Beatrice's car. As they drove, he realized that they were not going to Beatrice's house. The road was unfamiliar, lined with hotels and upscale restaurants. "Madam, where are we going?" Emmanuel asked, feeling confused and a little worried. "Please call me Beatrice," she said softly. "We are going to my hotel room. I have some clothes here that need cleaning. Is that okay?" Emmanuel nodded, still feeling uncertain. When they arrived at the hotel, Beatrice led him into her room. The scent of expensive perfume filled the air. As soon as they were inside, she locked the door and began to undress. Emmanuel's eyes widened in shock. "What are you doing?" he stammered. Beatrice looked at him and said, "Emmanuel, I want you. I have not been able to think about anything else since that day in the rain. Please don't say no to me." "But I have a girlfriend," Emmanuel protested, backing away, his voice trembling with hesitation. "And I have a husband," Madame Beatrice replied, her voice dripping with persuasion. "But he's never here, and I am lonely. No one has to know about this." She reached out into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick bundle of cash, fanning through the crisp notes. "There's more where this came from. I can take care of you." Emmanuel stared at the money, his mind racing. It was more cash than he had ever seen in his life. His hands clenched into fists at his sides as he wrestled with his thoughts. But then he thought of Zainab waiting for him at home, her warm smile, the way she held on to hope even in their darkest days. "No!" he shouted suddenly, his voice cracking as he turned and bolted from the room. Emmanuel ran all the way home, his heart pounding against his ribs. When he finally reached his apartment, breathless and sweating, he was shocked to see Zainab sitting outside their room, crying. All their belongings were scattered around her, some clothes half folded, others spilling from the suitcase she had barely managed to close. "What happened?" Emmanuel asked, rushing to Zainab's side, his hands shaking as he cupped her tear-streaked face. Zainab looked at him, her eyes red and swollen. The landlord came. He threw everything out and locked the room. "We are 3 months behind on rent, Emmanuel. What are we going to do?" Emmanuel felt a wave of guilt wash over him like a cold tide. He had been struggling to save money for the rent, but his business had been slow, and with the extra expense of supporting Zainab, it had been impossible to keep up. He ran a tired hand through his damp hair, feeling the weight of their troubles crush him. "Don't worry," he told Zainab, forcing a reassuring smile. "I will figure out something. Let me talk to the landlord." Emmanuel went to his shop and got his savings box, the one he had hidden beneath a pile of neatly folded laundry. His hands shook as he opened it, and his stomach dropped when he realized with dismay that the money inside wasn't even close to what he owed. Still, he took what little he had and went to speak with the landlord. After much begging, the landlord agreed to let them stay for one more night if Emmanuel paid what he had, and promised to bring the rest the next day. "But tomorrow means tomorrow, Emmanuel," the landlord said, his tone sharp and unwavering. "If you don't have the full amount, you are out for good." Emmanuel and Zainab moved their belongings back into the room, but sleep eluded him that night. He kept staring at the ceiling, Madame Beatrice's offer swirling in his mind. Where else could he get enough money to pay rent and keep a roof over their heads? As the sun rose, Emmanuel made a decision he never thought he would make. With a heavy heart, he called Madame Beatrice. "I knew you would change your mind," Madame Beatrice said when she answered, her voice filled with amusement. "Meet me at the hotel in an hour." Emmanuel felt sick as he left the house, telling Zainab he had an important job to do. His fingers curled into his palm as he walked the dimly lit streets, his conscience waging war against his desperation. When he arrived at the hotel, Madame Beatrice was waiting for him, lounging on the bed with a sly smile. What happened next was a blow to Emmanuel's spirit. He felt ashamed and disgusted with himself, like a man who had sold his soul for survival. But when it was over, Madame Beatrice handed him several bundles of cash, the weight of them making his hands tremble. "Be a good boy, and I will take care of you," she said, her voice teasing and triumphant. "No, madam," Emmanuel said firmly, his jaw tightening. "This was a one-time thing. It won't happen again." He took the money and left quickly, each step feeling heavier than the last. Emmanuel paid off the landlord and had enough left over to buy some things for the house. Zainab was confused and surprised by their sudden change in fortune. "Where did you get all this money from?" she asked, eyeing him suspiciously. "Don't worry about it," Emmanuel snapped, feeling guilty and angry at himself. "Just enjoy, okay?" But Zainab could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. This wasn't like Emmanuel at all. The man she loved had changed, and it terrified her. Meanwhile, Madame Beatrice could not stop thinking about her encounter with Emmanuel. That evening, she called her friend Fatima to tell her all about it. "Girl, you wouldn't believe it, Madame," Beatrice blushed. "It was amazing. He's so big and sweet." As Fatima listened to her friend, a dark thought began to form in her mind. She hadn't seen her husband in years. Maybe she deserved a taste of this forbidden fruit too. The next morning, Fatima drove to Emmanuel's laundry shop. Unlike Madame Beatrice, she did not bother with small talk. She handed Emmanuel a piece of paper with an address written on it, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently against the counter. "Be at this address by 8:00 p.m. tonight," she said bluntly. "You know what I mean." Then she got back into her car and drove off, leaving Emmanuel standing there in shock, the small piece of paper burning a hole in his hand. Emmanuel felt frozen, wondering what kind of woman made this kind of offer. He had told himself that what happened with Madame Beatrice was a one-time thing. He did not want to become the kind of man who sleeps with married women for money. But as he sat in his empty shop, waiting for customers who rarely came, Emmanuel started to think about his life. He had been doing laundry for years, but he had nothing to show for it. He could not even pay his rent on time. But look at all the money he got from just one night with Madame Beatrice. These women wanted him and were willing to pay more than he could ever earn honestly. Maybe it was time to use what he had to get what he wanted. Maybe it was time to play along. That night, Emmanuel went to Fatima's house. Just like with Madame Beatrice, he left with a large amount of cash. And so began Emmanuel's new life as the secret lover of the town's wealthy women. It did not take long for Madame Beatrice to find out that Fatima was also sleeping with Emmanuel. The two best friends quickly became bitter rivals, each trying to outdo the other, with expensive gifts for Emmanuel. As the weeks passed, Zainab noticed a big change in Emmanuel. He stopped going to his laundry shop altogether. He spent most of his nights away from home and always came back with expensive clothes and gadgets that she knew he could not afford on his own. Zainab lay awake at night, worrying about what Emmanuel had gotten himself into. This wasn't the man she knew and loved. What had happened to his principles, his belief in hard work and honesty? There was money. Emmanuel came home driving a brand new car. Zainab could not believe her eyes. I don't know what you have gotten yourself into, she said, but I know it is nothing good. When it all blows up in your face, and it will, I won't be here to see it. She started packing, tears streaming down her face. Emmanuel just watched her, his expression cold. Then go, he shouted. Instead of being happy and enjoying our new life, you want to leave. Fine, go. Zainab looked at Emmanuel one last time, her voice breaking. What happened to your principles? She asked. What happened to dignity in labor? I don't recognize you anymore, Emmanuel. And with that, she walked out of the door. Zainab went to stay with her friend, Fatima, for a few days while she figured out what to do next. She was thinking about going back to her village when she met Fatima's brother, David. David was a teacher who earned a modest and honest living. He was kind and thoughtful. He listened patiently as Zainab poured out her heart about her troubles with Emmanuel. Before long, Zainab found herself falling for David. 2 months after leaving Emmanuel, David asked Zainab to marry him. Zainab, seeing in David the qualities she had once loved in Emmanuel, happily accepted. They set a date for their wedding, and Zainab felt like she was finally getting her life back on track. Meanwhile, Emmanuel was still caught up in his affairs with Madame Beatrice and Fatima, enjoying the wealth and luxury they showered on him. He barely thought about Zainab anymore, too caught up in his new lifestyle. But Emmanuel's luck was about to run out. One evening, as he was taking a walk in his neighborhood, a black SUV suddenly pulled up beside him. Before he could react, two large men jumped out, grabbed him, and shoved him into the back of the car. Terrified Emmanuel was taken to an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. There, he was brought face to face with an angry-looking middle-aged man. So, you're the one sleeping with my wife. The man thundered. It was Otumba, Fatima's husband. His jealousy had boiled over after Madame Beatrice had sent evidence of Fatima's affair with Emmanuel to Otumba, who had flown back to the country. Your wife, Emmanuel stammered, realizing with horror the trouble he was in. Otumba nodded to his men, who began beating Emmanuel mercilessly. Please, I am sorry. Emmanuel cried out, I will never go near your wife or anyone else's wife again. Please, don't kill me. When they were finished, Otumba's men threw Emmanuel back into the car and dumped him on the street near his home. Bruised and bleeding, Emmanuel staggered back to his feet. But when he got home, he found it empty. The men had taken everything: the car, all the expensive gifts, even his clothes. Emmanuel was left with nothing. As he sat on the floor of his empty room, Emmanuel thought about how far he had fallen. He had lost everything: his business, his possessions, and worst of all, his self-respect. Then he thought about Zainab, sweet, honest Zainab, who had loved him when he had nothing. I have to find her, he said to himself. The next morning, ignoring his aching body, Emmanuel set out to look for Zainab. One of his neighbors, Auntie J, offered to take him to where Zainab was living now. When they arrived at the address, Emmanuel knocked on the door. To his surprise, a man's voice answered, Are you sure this is the right place? But the biggest shock was yet to come. When the door opened, Emmanuel found himself face to face with a tall, handsome man. I am looking for Zainab, Emmanuel said. The man smiled. Oh, that must be my wife, he replied. Darling, someone is here to see you. Emmanuel felt like the ground was spinning under his feet. Zainab was married, How long had he been caught up in his own selfish world? Who is it? Zainab's familiar voice called out. A moment later, she appeared at the doorway. Emmanuel's jaw dropped. Zainab was heavily pregnant, her belly round and full. Emmanuel opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. To speak, but no words came out. He just stood there, tears rolling down his cheeks as he realized the full extent of what he had lost. Zainab looked at Emmanuel with a mix of pity and sadness. Emmanuel, what are you doing here? She asked. Emmanuel struggled to find his voice. Zainab, I'm so sorry for everything. I made so many mistakes. I lost my way. Can you ever forgive me? Oh, Emmanuel, she sighed. I forgave you a long time ago, but that does not change anything. I have moved on with my life. I am happy now, truly happy. I hope someday you can find that happiness too. David, sensing the tension, put his arm around Zainab. I think you should go now, he said to Emmanuel. Emmanuel nodded. He turned away, each step feeling heavier than the last. As he reached the street, he looked back one last time. Through the window, he could see Zainab and David embracing, their faces full of love and joy. In that moment, Emmanuel understood the true cost of his actions. He had not only lost his dignity and self-respect, but he had also lost the love of his life, a good woman who had stood by him through hard times and believed in him when no one else did. This is a cautionary tale, a reminder that actions have consequences and poor choices can lead to losing the things that truly matter in life. The story of Emmanuel is a powerful lesson about the consequences of greed and losing one's values. Once a hardworking and honest man, he allowed wealth and temptation to lead him astray. In the end, he lost everything: his dignity, his love, and his future. This tale reminds us that no amount of money can replace integrity and true relationships. When we abandon our principles for temporary pleasures, we risk losing the things that truly matter. Stay true to your values and cherish those who stand by you. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more interesting videos. See you in the next one. As Zainab got to the assembly ground, she felt the teachers and students looking at her curiously. She heard some whispering, hushed tones mixing with the morning air. Zainab knew they were wondering why she left Starlight Academy, a fancy private girls' school, to come to this public high school. That's her, the new girl. I heard she got kicked out of her old school. Look at her acting all high and mighty. Zainab kept her head high, trying to ignore the comments. The cool morning breeze brushed against her skin as she found a spot at the back of the assembly and stood quietly, waiting for the principal to speak. Mr. Okafor, the principal of Ika High School, was a tall man with a stern face, his thick glasses perched low on his nose. He stepped onto the makeshift stage and cleared his throat loudly. "Good morning, students," he began, his voice booming across the field. "Today, we have a new addition to our school. Zainab, please come forward." Zainab's heart raced as she made her way to the front. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, judging her every move. The grass beneath her shoes felt damp, and she steadied herself, trying not to let her nerves show. "This is Zainab," Mr. Okafor announced. "She's joining us from Starlight Academy. I expect all of you to make her feel welcome." As Zainab stood there, she could hear the murmurs grow louder. Starlight Academy was well known, and many were wondering why she had left such a prestigious school. After the assembly, Zainab headed to her new classroom, weaving through the crowded corridors. She sat at a desk in the back, hoping to avoid attention. The wooden desk was slightly chipped at the edges, and she traced a carved name with her fingers absent-mindedly. But as students filed in, many of them stared at her openly. A girl with bright red hair plopped down in the seat next to Zainab, her bangles clinking softly as she moved. "Hi, I'm Fatima," she said with a friendly smile. "You're the new girl, right? From that fancy school?" Zainab nodded, relieved to find someone who seemed nice. "Yeah, yes, I'm Zainab. It's nice to meet you." Fatima leaned in, her voice lowering to a whisper. "Why did you leave your old school? Must have been something big to end up here." Zainab felt her face grow hot. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a boy's voice cut through the chatter of the classroom. "I bet I know why she left," he said loudly, his smirk evident in his tone. "My cousin goes to Starlight Academy. Says there was a huge scandal about a girl who was sleeping with teachers for grades. Bet that was you, wasn't it?" The classroom fell silent. All eyes turned to Zainab, waiting for her response. She felt her hands begin to shake, the weight of their stares pressing down on her. "That's not true," Zainab said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Those were just rumors. I never did anything like that." The boy scoffed. "Sure, that's what they all say. Why else would you leave such a great school for this dump?" Fatima looked at Zainab with wide eyes. "Is that true? Did you really?" Zainab stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, drawing even more attention. "I said it's not true," she repeated firmly. "I'm here to study and learn, just like the rest of you. What happened at my old school is in the past." Just then, their class teacher walked in, ending the conversation. But Zainab could still feel the stares and hear the whispers throughout the lesson. As the day went on, Zainab found herself struggling to keep up with the lessons. The teaching style at Ika High School was different from what she was used to, and the resources were limited. The textbooks were older, pages yellowed and worn from years of use. In math class, when the teacher asked a question, Zainab raised her hand to answer, just like she always had. "Ah, the new girl thinks she's smarter than all of us," a girl sitting nearby muttered, rolling her eyes. Zainab slowly lowered her hand, feeling conflicted. She knew the answer, but was it worth drawing more attention to herself? During lunch break, Zainab sat alone under a tree in the schoolyard. She watched as groups of friends laughed and chatted, their voices a distant hum. A light breeze rustled the leaves above her, providing shade from the afternoon sun. Fatima approached her, carrying a lunchbox wrapped neatly in a cloth. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. Zainab nodded, grateful for the company. As they sat, Fatima spoke up. "Listen, about what that guy said in class. I'm sorry. It wasn't cool of him to spread rumors like that." Zainab sighed, picking at the hem of her sleeve. "Thanks. It's not true. Yes, I made some mistakes at my old school, but I never did anything that bad. I just want a fresh start." Fatima nodded thoughtfully, chewing on a piece of bread. "You've got one here. It might not be as fancy as your old school, but Ika High isn't so bad once you get used to it." As they continued to chat, Zainab felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe she could find her place here after all. Weeks passed, and Zainab slowly began to adjust to life at Ika High School. She kept her head down, focused on her studies, and tried to ignore the lingering whispers and stares. The dusty chalkboards, the creaky desks, and the occasional flickering light in the classroom became familiar sights to her. One day, Mr. Abdul, the English teacher, announced a writing competition. He stood in front of the class, his neatly pressed shirt tucked into his trousers, adjusting his glasses as he spoke. "The winner," he said, his eyes scanning the classroom, "will represent our school at the state level competition. It's a big opportunity, so I expect your best work." Zainab's eyes lit up. This was her chance to prove herself, to show everyone that she was more than just rumors and gossip. As soon as she got home, Zainab threw herself into writing. She spent hours crafting her story, pouring all her experiences and emotions into it. The dim light from her bedside lamp flickered as she scribbled away, pausing only to sip from a glass of water. When she finally finished, she felt proud of what she had created. The day of the results arrived. Mr. Abdul stood in front of the class, holding a stack of papers, the edges slightly curled from being handled repeatedly. "I've read all your entries," he began, "and I must say, I'm impressed." But one stood out above the rest. He smiled. "The winner is Zainab." The classroom erupted in murmurs. Zainab felt a mix of joy and anxiety as she walked to the front to receive her paper. The wooden floor beneath her feet creaked slightly as she took each step. "Excellent work, Zainab," Mr. Abdul said, smiling. "Your story was truly exceptional." As Zainab returned to her seat, she overheard a group of students whispering, "Of course she won." Probably used her old tricks to charm Mr. Abdul. "Yeah, bet she didn't even write it herself. Probably got help from her rich parents." Zainab felt her happiness deflate. Would she ever escape her past? Fatima, who had become Zainab's closest friend, noticed her stress. "Don't listen to them," she whispered. "You won fair and square. Your story was amazing." Despite Fatima's support, Zainab couldn't shake off the feeling of doubt. That night, she approached her parents at the dinner table, the aroma of warm soup and fresh bread filling the air. "Mom, Dad," she said hesitantly, "I won the writing competition at school." Her parents beamed with pride. "That's wonderful, Zainab," her mother exclaimed, setting her spoon down with a delighted smile. But Zainab continued, "Some students think I cheated. They don't believe I could have won on my own." Her father's face grew serious as he leaned forward. "Zainab, we know you've been working hard to turn things around. Don't let anyone make you doubt yourself." Encouraged by her parents' words, Zainab decided to confront the rumors head on. The next day at school, she approached Mr. Abdul after class, the scent of chalk and old books lingering in the air. "Sir," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "I heard some students say I might have cheated in the competition. I want you to know that I didn't. I want you to know that I didn't. I wrote that story all by myself." Mr. Abdul looked at her with surprise, setting down the paper he had been grading. "Zainab, I never doubted that for a moment. Your writing has a unique voice that can't be faked. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Feeling bolstered by Mr. Abdul's words, Zainab made a decision. She would prove to everyone, once and for all, that she was more than just a pretty face. As the state-level competition approached, Zainab threw herself into preparation. She spent hours in the school library, reading and researching, flipping through well-worn pages, and jotting down notes in her notebook. Her dedication didn't go unnoticed. One afternoon, as Zainab was buried in a book, she heard someone clear their throat. She looked up to see Emmanuel, one of the top students in her class, standing awkwardly by her table, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Oh, Zainab," he said hesitantly. "I was wondering if you could help me with something. I'm struggling with the literature assignment, and I heard you're really good at it." Zainab was surprised. This was the first time someone other than Fatima had approached her for help. "Sure," she said, smiling. "What part are you having trouble with?" As they walked together, Zainab found herself enjoying the process of explaining and teaching. Word spread quickly, and soon other students were seeking her help too. The study sessions often took place under the large mango tree in the schoolyard, where students gathered with their books and notes. Fatima watched this transformation with a grin. "Look at you," she said one day. "From outcast to unofficial tutor. I told you things would get better." Finally, the day of the state competition arrived. Zainab was nervous when she found out that Starlight Academy was also in the final round. She would be competing against her old school. The competition was held in a grand auditorium, its high ceilings and bright stage lights making her heart pound with anticipation. The competition was held in a big hall. There were many people watching. When it was Zainab's turn, she took a deep breath and started reading her story. As she read, the room got very quiet. Everyone was listening closely. Zainab's story was about a girl who made mistakes but learned from them. It was really her own story. When Zainab finished, there was a moment of silence. Then everyone started clapping loudly. The judges took a long time to decide. Finally, they were ready to announce the winner. The winner of this year's state writing competition is... The head judge paused. "Zainab Idris from Ika High School." The Ika High School students in the audience cheered loudly. Zainab couldn't believe it. She had won. As Zainab went to get her trophy, she saw her old teachers and classmates from Starlight Academy. This could have been Starlight Academy's victory if they hadn't expelled Zainab. Backstage, while Zainab was calling her parents to tell them the good news, she heard someone coming toward her. "Congratulations, Zainab," a voice said. Zainab looked up and saw Amina walking towards her, crying. "Zainab, can you ever forgive me?" Amina said. "I'm so sorry for lying about you and telling everyone at school that you were sleeping with our male teachers. You're sorry?" Zainab said angrily. "You told a lie that got me kicked out of school." "I was jealous and I let it control me," Amina said. "Please forgive me, Zainab." "If you want me to forgive you, tell everyone the truth," Zainab said. And then she walked away. Mr. Okafor, who had come to watch, was smiling widely. "Well done, Zainab," he said. "You've made Ika High School very proud." Back at Starlight Academy, Amina told the truth about what she had done. Madam Beatrice, the principal, was shocked. "Amina, you almost ruined that girl's future with your lie." As punishment, Amina had to repeat her class and stay in school for 2 extra years. She would watch her classmates graduate while she stayed back and became classmates with students younger than her. Mr. Thompson and Mr. Abdul were declared unfit to be teachers and were sacked from Starlight Academy. Meanwhile, at Ika High School, things changed a lot. People stopped whispering about Zainab. Instead, they asked her for help with their studies. Zainab's study group got bigger and bigger. One day, Zainab heard some students talking about her. Remember when we thought she was just a rich, pretty girl? One said, "Yeah, I feel bad about that now." Another replied, "She's actually really nice and smart." Zainab smiled to herself. She had finally found her place at Ika High School. At the end of the school year, Mr. Okafor called Zainab to his office. "Zainab," he said, "I'm very proud of you. You've done well in your studies, and you've helped other students too. You're a great student, and Ika High School is lucky to have you." Zainab felt happy tears in her eyes. "Thank you, sir," she said. "Ika High gave me a second chance, and I'm grateful." As Zainab left the office, she thought about everything that had happened. She came to Ika feeling alone and scared, but now she had good friends like Fatima, and she had good friends like Fatima, and she had proven that she. Zainab learned that being pretty or smart wasn't enough. What mattered was how you used your talents to help others. She also learned that it's okay to make mistakes, as long as you learn from them. As she joined her friends for lunch, Zainab felt truly happy. She knew there would still be hard times ahead, but she was stronger now, and she had good friends to help her. Zainab was no longer just a pretty girl from Starlight Academy. She was Zainab from Ika High School, a good student, a helpful friend, and a state writing champion, and she was proud of who she had become. The story of Zainab teaches us a powerful lesson about resilience, integrity, and self-worth. Despite facing false rumors, harsh judgment, and a difficult transition, she remained focused on proving her true value through hard work and perseverance. This story reminds us that no matter what others say, our actions and determination define who we are, not the opinions of those who doubt us. Zainab's journey also highlights the importance of kindness and friendship, as shown through Fatima's support. It is a reminder that while mistakes may be part of our past, they do not have to dictate our future. What truly matters is how we learn, grow, and use our talents to uplift ourselves and others.